In this last video, we will conclude analyzing some of the discrepancies presently accepted as fact in African history. Like before, this video will start from where the second part left off, and it may seem abrupt because I had to break up the 50-minute long video into sections to successfully upload it to YouTube. I hope you enjoy it, and there will be more to come later on. So we also have to analyze the story of the Queen of Sheba. Now, this is not Sheba. As long as it's a Proto-Bantu word, and it seems like it is a Proto-Bantu word, it is not She with an E, because She is an insult. That's how we insult in the Proto-Bantu language. It means silliness or ignorance. And going back to the Portuguese interpretation of African languages, it seems to me this was most likely she with an I, as in Shiva, Ushiba, which makes more sense because Shiva, Ushiba, loosely translated means to know or to have great knowledge. It means intelligence, or the great manifestation of knowledge and intelligence. Now, her story and the story of Queen Judith are interesting to me, but her story specifically seems like an attempt to entrench and usurp the people to control the gold resources. Because the line of succession, if this was in any way related to the Proto-Bantu, and this was common in many other African societies that were not patrilineal, because a lot of African societies were actually matrilineal. The line of succession was only valid through a princess. So if someone had a child with a princess, then they had rights to claim the throne. But there are some issues with her story, because if she wasn't married to Solomon, her child would be called Mwana wa Musogwe, meaning a child made in and for the bush, an illegitimate child. So the child would have no claim to anything even from her, and would be subject to her siblings that had their lubono gifted, or dowry. So lubono is what we call dowry. Other people call it lobola. So according to Bantu custom, lubono lwamugwati, we call that bride wealth, not bride price. There's a big difference. It's bride wealth. It's meant to help the bride and her children sustain themselves for life, basically. But according to the story, Solomon may have legitimized the child by gifting the lubono or dowry, which may explain the gifts she came back carrying. Now, it is important to analyze the way of life of the people in these regions that we look at to help us explain their relations and possible origins, because here is a quote about the Abyssinians who told the Portuguese of the story of the Queen of Sheba. The Abyssinians cannot properly be said to have either cities or houses. They live either in tents or cottages made of straw and clay, for they are very rarely built with stone. Now, this is interesting when we consider the existence of the obelisks and the stone temples, which means we have to figure out what happened to the stonemason population. Lastly, we have the Maravi people, the Yao, who also consist of the Chewa. And these are the modern day people of Malawi, and they become very important to this whole story of African history and shaping African history, because the Yao were notorious slave raiders and traders, and they were allied with the Arabs on the East Coast. They contributed to the destabilization of the Zambezi region, which could explain why Malawi is in its state today, but that's just me. And they most likely contributed to the extinction of the Proto-Bantu, Monga, and Koya realms in that region. So We know this was Proto-Bantu territory because this is where the Nkoya, Shidima, or Shindi realm was located. It sort of covered this entire area. And Lilongwe is a Proto-Bantu expression. So if you've heard of the capital, Lilongwe, that is a Proto-Bantu expression, and it is what we use for our very nearest and dearest. So oversimplified, it means one who I always take with me and not ever leave behind. It's a very deep expression that we only use for the people that we really consider our heart, basically. And most of the time we use the Jilongwe, the GY prefix, and not the LI prefix. So this shows that the language was modified by an admixture, because that LI prefix is also used by the tribes or the people really with the Nilo-Saharan admixture like Mfecane or Litunga. So if you're curious as to what the Proto-Bantu language sounds like, I will link a cover of Maroon 5's Memories song, which was covered by a Proto-Bantu person, and it is sung in the standard Proto-Bantu language. And here the artist uses the GY, Jilongwe expression. Back to the Maravi people. The Chewa speak a language I grew up hearing and understanding to Konyanja. And this is probably where I will get ugly. But Kaunda was Yawo from Malawi, and he hijacked the presidency. And we know he hijacked it because that was our grandparents' money that sponsored the independence struggles. So they were pretty pissed off and they never let us forget. And so he hijacked it from the young, impatient, and hard-headed, educated Lozis, who then lost the country and all the money that bought independence for northwestern Rhodesia, because initially they were only paying for northwestern Rhodesia, not northeastern Rhodesia, Nyasaland, or southern Rhodesia, because most of the people in power in these places were the descendants of the people who had been hacking and killing our ancestors. So the wounds were pretty raw, and we would not even justify ourselves over that. So at this time, the young educated people were swept up by Pan-Africanism, and they believed that one Africa and yada yada. And they forgot that people are shaped by their cultures, by their histories, and they learned the hard way. You see, the Yao had destroyed the Proto-Bantu, and Kaunda continued this mission in what became Zambia, and he basically destroyed what was northwestern Rhodesia, Barotseland, and southern Zambia. And he took the money from the Royal Bank, which adjusted for inflation would have been $2 billion in 1964, or is that pounds? I have to remember that. But he took most of this money and put it in the central bank, while these regions were left to decline in abject poverty. It was so bad. And also he tried to erase the culture, because like we all eat food that is cultural. And so what he started doing was, instead of allowing schools, for example boarding schools, to simply source food from local vendors, he had the food imported. So in Barotseland, for example, a lot of people eat fish because they live by the Zambezi River, so fishing is a primary source of food. he would have them eat the small sardines, like capenta. They call it capenta from like northern province, and they were like, what the hell? Like, how about we feed those guys sihopani? So if you've never heard of a sihopani is a monitor lizard that's eaten by the people in Barotaland. So it's like, dude, I don't think you would want to be fed that. So just respect everybody's cultural practices, and that is something he failed to do. And that's one reason I'm really motivated to do what I do, talking about African history and sort of bringing it to the mainstream and making us more aware that we need to reassess it and analyze it for our own benefit, so we can be better people and we're not caught off guard, and we can all know our history and understand the data, because oftentimes other people know and they just go ahead and play you for a fool. So the reason I bring this up is because the Chewa language, or the language spoken by the Chewa people, is called Nyanja. And I grew up in Zambia and I did not know that until I read this recently. I was like, wait, they're the same language? And I grew up knowing people who spoke Nyanja and people who were Chewa, and they never said it was Nyanja. They never told me it was Nyanja. They just never mentioned it. It's almost like it was just something, I guess, that you should know. And I had no idea I was speaking Chewa. It almost feels like it's hidden, and that is because there are a lot of people from Malawi who come and settle in Zambia, and they are not supposed to be there. I know some Africans want open borders and free access, but it really destabilizes our countries when that happens without proper procedures, because eventually you get what we got with Kaunda, where you have this person that comes in and becomes a dictator for God knows how many years, 30 years, and he just discriminates and really reduces everyone to nothing. So there's a reason we have to have proper safeguards and protect the indigenous populations in those places from being overrun or colonized, really, by another African group, because it's intra-African colonization, which we need to talk about. And this is one of the biggest issues in Africa today, which actually causes a lot of the conflicts. So the reason I bring up this language is that it is considered a Bantu-derived language, but it also has some Somali words. And I need to verify this, but I did check with ChatGPT, and one word that it has is, the word for dog is galu, and it's shared in the Somali languages according to ChatGPT, or the Somali language, according to ChatGPT. And this means nothing right now, but it's worth analyzing when we want to understand these regions and how they were shaped. I know I said the last thing to share before, but this is actually the last thing. It's about the Boers, the colors, and the establishment of the Cape Colony and how it changed hands. And I would do a longer video on this, but let's quickly go through how the Mfecane was created, and this is what I found. When you talk about the depopulation of Southern Africa, it is often labeled as a conspiracy theory, and this is done to deliberately discredit what we're talking about and gaslight us, basically. But the British did, and likely still do, have a policy of terra nullius, which means land belonging to no one. and is up for grabs. So in order to claim Southern African land, they needed to show that it belonged to no one. And the best way to do this was to create a wall that forced people to either come under a despot or become indentured servants or serfs. Because the people had either three options: die fighting, come under Nguniswana or Griqua despot, or become a colonist serf. And it's worth mentioning that all the Mfecane warlords were connected to Dingiswayo, who was trained at the Cape Colony. That's the story, that he was actually at the Cape Colony. And the interesting thing about these warlords is that they targeted Proto-Bantu remnant populations. Shaga targeted the Eastern Cape. Proto-Bantu Mzilikazi targeted my ancestors who were in what is now Matabeleland, and the Mahurutsi and the Tolwakami Proto-Bantu. Shoshangani targeted the Inhambane or Mozambican Proto-Bantu. Zwangendaba targeted the Lilongwe region Proto-Bantu. Sebetwani targeted the Barote region Proto-Bantu, and this pattern is worth investigating. So about the depopulation and the freeing of the land from African occupation so it could be transferred to European hands, promises were made to the Griqua, and I will make a video about this. So the Griqua are descendants of Europeans and Africans, and in some instances Malay. These were raised at the Cape Colony to be Dutch or Cape Dutch, and they were raised as serfs. So they were supposed to form the labor class of the Cape Colony, which was in Dutch hands at the time. So they could barely speak any of their ancestral African languages. Actually, maybe they actually even couldn't speak them and only spoke Cape Dutch, which is one reason why the coloureds continued to identify as Calvinists or with European culture or the Dutch settlers more than their African ancestry. So primary sources show that the British promised them land as long as they carried out a slave trade from the Western Front, meaning they were the Mfecane of the Western Front, who destabilized the Africans in that region, forcing them into the Cape Colony to work as laborers, where they would live forever, I guess, and serve British interests. But they failed to do so with some African groups like the Nkosa who fought back, and there were some San people who did fight back too. Now this promise of farmland is why a lot of the white population in South Africa have more of the land, and this set the stage for apartheid, even though before 1705, anyone at the Dutch-controlled Cape could become what they called a free burger, which meant a citizen, and they had voting rights. Because everyone at the Dutch-controlled Cape was working for the Dutch East India Company, and a company is a company. They are only interested in profits. So as long as these individuals contributed to the profits, they would receive privileges, which is why the first woman to establish a successful vineyard at the Dutch-controlled Cape, which became the foundation for the Cape Town winery or wine culture, was a formerly enslaved woman from Guinea. Well, her parents were from Guinea, but she was born within the borders of the Dutch-controlled Cape to an enslaved mother and a free father, and her name was Zwarte Maria Everts. or Black Maria Everts to emphasize that she was actually African. So, conventional texts and history won't give you this information because it hasn't been looked at this way through this critical lens. Not because it's not available, but we need to apply this critical lens to get African history right and fix our societies. Because we can only fix our societies if we have some truth and not build everything on a lie or a story that doesn't really explain everything. Half truths, I guess. I will go into more details about these realizations, and hopefully they help shape our societies and fix a lot of the things that need to be fixed within our societies so that they can be better societies for everyone, not just a few, and not just better but peaceful and secure societies. Because when we know what our history is, we know what problems are present and why those are present, and we will understand how to fix them. I know this video was a long video, but I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please like and subscribe. There's more to come, and I will continue making these realization videos and keep you updated on what I'm working on and what I've found. And I will also make the detailed versions of this data and continue translating Majwi Nejali, which is the ancient Egyptian language, which is the Proto-Bantu language and the source of all our Bantu languages. I also appreciate all our supporters on Ko-fi. Thank you so much. Your support goes a long way towards making this research and these videos possible. And if you like this content and would like to support it, a link to our Ko-fi account is in the description box below. I have also included the sources finally in the description box. Thank you for watching.